Sound check on how this
If you would like to, yeah.
1, 2.
1, 2, 1, 2.
1, 2, 3.
4, 5, 6.
7, 8, 9.
3, 6, 9. 12, 15, 18.
Yes.
Hello.
420.
420.
Who said 420?
It's gonna have to speak up.
Your hair.
Gonna go and do my convention thing. Got my costume, I'm going now. Yeah, we're having a ball. It's Star Trek, y'all.
Hello, everyone. Thank you all for being here. This is where it all started for our show. A table read of the seminal Star Trek Enterprise episode, Shuttlepod One, starring our heroes, Dominic, Keating, and Trinneer. So to do this now, a year later, is really exciting. I'm very, very proud of what we've been doing over the last year, and I'm very grateful. We are all very grateful for all of you. So welcome to this very, very special live staged reading of the seminal Star Trek episode, Shuttlepod One, written by Rick Berman Brannon Braga. I believe Monday is the 21st anniversary of its original broadcast. We would like to welcome our stars tonight. LaRose will be reading for Hoshi. Cirroc Lofton will be reading for Mayweather. Andrew Robinson will be reading for Phlox. Nana Visitor for T'Pol. Vaughn Armstrong for Archer. Dominic Keating will be playing Lieutenant Malcolm Reed. And Trinneer will be playing Commander Charles Trip Tucker III. That was me. I did that.
I've seen a medical man.
And you're better?
I'm better.
All right. Enterprise, Shuttlepod 1, fade in. Exterior Shuttlepod at impulse. A large group of asteroids can be seen in the distance. Interior Shuttlepod. Reed is at the helm. Trip is in the rear working on an open panel, tinkering with various circuitry. As we'll learn, their sensors are down, and Reed is looking out the window.
Captain said they'd be mapping this asteroid field, but I don't see a head and the tails of them.
Maybe it's another asteroid field.
No, it's this one. 2 primaries, 17 planetesimals.
They weren't expecting us back for 2 days. Maybe they finished and went off to do something else.
Well, with our sensor array down, we won't know when they get back till we see them, so... Any luck with the comm?
Dead as a doornail. I don't understand it.
Yeah, well, no doubt your boys will take this pod apart piece by piece once it's back in the launch bay.
I'd feel a lot more comfortable having everything in working order by the time Enterprise gets back.
Well, tinker all you like. I've got a copy of Ulysses here. I doubt I'll be halfway through it by the time the ship gets back.
Ulysses? I'd rather realign every microcircuit on this shuttle than try to wade through that baby.
British schools have a core curriculum. It serves to provide a well-rounded education. Sometimes I think you North Americans read nothing but comic books. And those ridiculous science fiction novels.
I'll have you know that Superman was laced with metaphor. Subtext layered on subtext.
Yeah, if Dr. Cochrane had only been a European, the Vulcans would have been far less reticent to help us. But no, he had to be from Montana. Probably spent his nights reading about cowboys and Indians.
Yeah, well, I don't recall any Europeans figuring out how to build a warp engine.
As they approach the asteroid, Reed sees something out the window.
Commander.
Trip is busy working.
No Brits, no Italians, no Serbo-Croatians.
Commander, I think you better come and take a look at this.
Trip stands and moves to the helm, peers outside. Out the window, we can see the surface of a field of debris on the asteroid's surface.
Bring us in closer.
Reed works. As the shuttle moves closer, we can now see that the asteroid is strewn with hundreds of unidentifiable metallic fragments.
Closer, Malcolm.
Exterior space, the shuttle pod, rolls 90 degrees and makes a low pass over the debris field. Interior shuttle pod, Trip and Reed are peering through the side window, facing downward.
Was it a ship?
Thought the damn sensors were only working. We could... Bring us around again.
Reed works the helm. Exterior asteroid surface, debris is all around. The shuttle pod is approaching at low altitude in the same 90-degree attitude. Interior shuttle pod, they watch out the window for a moment, then...
There. Slow down.
Through the window, Lying among the pieces of charred debris, we see a hull fragment with O1 written across it. The two men take this in, startled. Fade out. End of teaser. Act 1, fade in. Exterior space, Enterprise, at warp. Interior ready room. Archer is at his desk. The door chimes.
Come in.
Hoshi enters.
How are the Tesnians doing?
Dr. Phlox can only keep 12 of them in the decon chamber at a time.
How about the other, what is it, 22?
He's rotating them. They seem to be doing fine on our atmosphere, but they need at least 6 hours of boron gas a day. He says we've got enough to get them home.
Have you learned their language?
Yes, sir.
What did they have to say?
They're pretty rattled. Most of them had been on that ship for years. It's a lot to digest. They lost everything.
They're alive. Does the captain have any idea what happened?
No, and he feels terrible about the damage to Enterprise. He has no idea what went wrong. When they approached our docking port, they lost control of their sensor array. And then a few seconds later, their navigation system went out.
Thank God their escape pods were working.
I saw the wreckage on the asteroid. There wasn't much left.
Archer taps a comm panel.
Archer to Mayweather. What's our ETA?
We should reach Tesney in about 40 hours, sir.
Oh, good work. That should have us back to our rendezvous coordinates well before Trip and Malcolm get there. Let's drop out of warp for a few minutes. I want to inspect the damage to our launch doors.
Aye, sir.
He taps the comm panel again.
Archer to T'Pol.
Yes, Captain.
Meet me at the orbital inspection pod.
Exterior space, Enterprise. The orbital inspection pod drops down out of a small auxiliary launch port and then slowly rises back to inspect the damage to Launch Bay 2. Interior orbital inspection pod. Archer and T'Pol are at the helm. Both are looking up through the off-camera windows.
Who's in charge of engineering while Trip's away?
Lieutenant Hess.
Well, tell her to get a team working on a new starboard door for Launch Bay 2.
Exterior space, Enterprise. The inspection pod passes the doors to Launch Bay 2, where we can see that a section has been seared off. The letters NX are visible, but the O1 is gone. Interior orbital inspection pod as before.
Everything else check out all right?
Astrometrics detected what could be microsingularities in the vicinity of the asteroid field.
Microsingularities are a Vulcan myth. There's no scientific evidence that they exist.
Our deflectors registered some unusual charged particles at the same time the Tesnian ship began to malfunction.
Any similar damage on Enterprise?
No, but our hull plating was polarized.
Microsingularities. If the Vulcans had their way, they'd blame them for the common cold.
Cut to Interior Shuttlepod One. Trip and Reed mid-conversation.
How about the lifeboats? They could have launched the lifeboats before the crash.
They'd be here. They only go 300 kph. They'd be right here waiting for us.
Are we sure there are no survivors down there?
Commander, we have to figure out what to do.
We can't just leave. That's Enterprise. We should at least find the black boxes.
With what? We have no radio, nothing to pick up the beacons.
Trip is pacing, wringing his hands, trying to stay focused.
What's the range on our distress beacon?
It's offline.
I'm talking about the portable one, the one on the away kit.
10 million kilometers, maybe 20. But I highly doubt there's a ship anywhere close to that.
Trip thinks.
We've only got 10 days worth of breathable air. How far to Echo 3?
At Impulse? A lot more than 10 days.
Well, if we could get close enough for it to pick up our distress beacon, it'd relay the signal back to Starfleet.
I'm afraid the math doesn't work out, Commander. It's still going to take our signal weeks, maybe months to reach Echo 3. By the time Starfleet got a ship out here, we'll be long dead.
But at least they'd find us. They'd get their shuttle pod back and a couple of well-preserved corpses.
Sir.
Which way?
Which way to what?
Echo 3. Which way to Echo 3?
I told you, sir, it's too far.
Do you know which direction it is, or don't you?
Navigation is down.
That's not what I asked you.
Do you want me to guess?
You come from a long line of Navy men, and you've got a real good memory. Look hard at those stars, find something that looks familiar, and tell me which way to go.
Sir.
That's an order.
Reed hesitates, then sits at the front window and looks at the stars. Trip folds his arms, immobile. A long beat as Reed stares.
I don't suppose you have a sextant handy?
I left it with my slide rule.
Reed keeps staring at the stars.
Well?
That blue giant, we may have gone by it, but I'm not sure.
That's good enough for me. take one more low pass over the wreckage, and then set a course.
A look between them, then Reed starts working the helm. Exterior space, asteroid. The shuttle pod makes a low pass over the debris field. Interior Shuttlepod One, Trip and Reed staring out the windows. It's an emotional moment for both men.
See you around, Captain.
He nods to Reed, who works the controls. Off the tension, we fade out. End of Act 1. Act 2, fade in. Exterior space, Shuttlepod 1, at impulse.
Personal log, Lieutenant Malcolm Reed, November 9th, 2151.
Interior Shuttlepod, Trip is sitting in the rear working on some components. He's removed from an open panel and placed on the floor. He's using high-tech hand tools, making adjustments, etc. Both men are showing beard growth. Reed is at the helm, talking to the comm, solemnly recording his log.
By the time anyone hears this, and by anyone I suppose I mean anyone human, Commander Tucker and I will be long dead. It's my intention to recount the events that led to the destruction of the Starship Enterprise, and to express my deepest feelings regarding my short but memorable service with Starfleet.
Trick looks up from his desk, from his work.
Tell him I'd love to add my 2 cents, but I'm trying to get a little work done here.
Reed taps a comm panel, pausing the recording.
If I had 1/10 of your knowledge concerning sensor technology, sir, I'd be more than willing to assist you.
All right, no offense. Go back to your log. If there's anything I need you to do, you'll be the first to know.
Reed taps a button and we hear a rewinding sound. He taps it again and we hear...
Short but memorable service with Starfleet.
Reed taps the button again, continues his log.
In order to test the targeting scanners on Shuttlepod One, Commander Tucker and I had to get at least 20,000 kilometers from Enterprise. During our third trial, we experienced a brief but sizable jolt, and shortly thereafter realized that our sensor array had gone offline.
This sensor array is more than offline. It's totally fried.
Reed taps the comm panel, slightly annoyed, but chooses not to show it. He hits rewind again.
Had gone offline.
He taps another button.
We had no choice but to head back to the asteroid field where Enterprise was involved in a mapping project. We found the ship, destroyed. Its debris strewn across a square kilometer of one of the larger asteroids. Had our sensors been working, we certainly would have done everything possible to determine the cause of the disaster. With only a short-range distress beacon and 10 days of air, we had no alternative but to set a course for Echo 3, where someday this log, and eventually this vessel, will be found. May God have mercy on our souls.
Why don't you cut the crap and get back here and help me?
Reed taps a button.
What would you like me to do?
I don't know. You can hold this flashlight or turn down the heat, whatever you want. Just getting a little tired of listening to all your pessimism.
If there's something you need me to do, I'll be happy to comply. But I'm afraid pessimism is not an accurate description of my log entry. I'm just being realistic, Commander.
We've got 10 days. We're bound to find someone out here.
At warp, perhaps. But at impulse?
I don't know, Vulcans, Klingons, Suliban, Zerillians, Andorians, God knows who's going to be lurking around the next planet we run into.
That's just it, sir. At impulse, we won't be running into any planets. Not for at least 6 or 7 years.
Then somebody could run into us. You ever think of that? Or see us on their sensors? The possibilities are endless.
Exasperated, Reed decides to stop arguing.
I'll heat up some rations. Unless you'd rather wait until we run into a vessel serving proper meals.
Trip shoots.
Rations will be fine.
Reed moves to an equipment locker, opens the door, and starts rummaging around inside. The compartment is filled with foil ration packs and other gear.
What are you in the mood for?
Depends. What are you serving?
Oh, let me see. Veal marsala, Chilean sea bass, mugu gai pan.
Any meatloaf?
Reed rolls his eyes and shuffles through the packets, pulls one out.
With gravy and mashed potatoes.
Perfect.
Reed pulls a packet for himself, then sees a bottle of liquor. He examines it.
It's not just thrown together, this, you know. Kentucky bourbon.
Let me see that. Yeah, the captain was planning to give that to somebody. Can't remember who. Well, I guess it's ours now.
Reed puts the bottle away, then places both ration packs into slots in the galley console. He taps a control where we hear the packets get perforated, hydrated, and then pulled into the device. After 5 seconds, a green light goes on. Reed opens the steaming food, pulls out forks and a napkin and out of a drawer, hands the bowl to Trip, and sits down next to him with the other. The two men begin to quietly eat.
What's that?
A sea bass.
Any good?
Yeah, it's lovely. Thank you.
They eat. Cut to exterior space, Shuttlepod One at Impulse. Interior Shuttlepod, hours later. The lights have been dimmed and Trip is lying in the rear deck in a small bunk that's been pulled out of the wall. He's covered in a blanket. As he tries to sleep, we can hear Reed and in the background continuing with his logs.
Captain Archer claims you told him you weren't even aware that I was serving on Enterprise. I find that difficult to believe, considering I wrote you twice in the weeks prior to our departure. Now, it is possible you never received those letters. You were, I believe, in the process of moving back to Malaysia at the time. But you must have spoken to Aunt Sherry during that period, and I know she received my letters. I would hate to go to my death thinking that either of you felt I was trying to avoid...
Trip throws the blanket off in frustration.
Malcolm, you've been at this for hours now. Don't you think it's time to give it a rest?
As I'm sure you heard, that was my esteemed colleague, Commander Charles Tucker. Mr. Tucker doesn't share my belief that it's essential to say what must be said, to leave a record, tie up loose ends. No, Mr. Tucker is laboring under the false hope that we're going to be miraculously rescued before we suffocate.
Mr. and Mrs. Reed, I realize you've just begun a period of mourning and that I'll never get an answer to this question, but I gotta ask it anyway. Was Malcolm always this cynical?
In a few days, when the reality of this situation begins to set in, you might very well decide to record some logs of your own. You can be assured that I will not interrupt you.
I just need to get some sleep, Malcolm. Is that so hard to understand?
We have less than 9 days of oxygen left. It seems a little wasteful to use it sleeping.
Well, if I don't waste some oxygen sleeping, I'm gonna start getting real cranky. And you don't wanna spend your last 9 days cooped up with me when I'm cranky. So turn that thing off and get some rest. It's an order.
A tense beat, then Reed taps the controller, turning back off. Satisfied, Trip moves back to his bunk. Fade to black. Fade in sick bay. Close on Reed as he opens his eyes, reveal that he's lying in a biobed. Archer, Phlox, and T'Pol looking down at him. Trip lies unconscious in the next biobed.
We're back.
Lie still, Lieutenant.
What happened? How did we...
You're a very brave man, Malcolm. Commander Tucker's going to be fine, thanks to you.
I'm afraid I don't understand.
Get some rest. There will be plenty of time to explain what happened in the morning.
Archer and Phlox head to the door. As they exit, Reed realizes that T'Pol has stayed behind.
What's up, Commander?
How do you feel?
I'd feel a lot better if I knew what was going on.
Captain Archer would be quite annoyed with me if I told you about your heroics. I believe he's looking forward to doing that himself in the morning.
Heroics?
I had no idea you could be so selfless. In the face of such danger. Most males of your species would have given in to their fear.
Well, since you're obviously not going to tell me what happened, I suppose a simple good night will have to do.
T'Pol sits on the bed.
Vulcans can never ignore courage.
She lays her hand gently on his.
And this Vulcan will never ignore Lieutenant Malcolm Reed again.
I can't say I've ever ignored you, T'Pol. Is it all right if I call you T'Pol?
It's all right. May I call you Malcolm?
I suppose so. Though I have to admit, I never really liked the name Malcolm. Always seemed a bit stuffy to me.
I think it's a lovely name. Malcolm is the Vulcan word for serenity.
Well then, I suppose I won't be changing it. It's a pity though, I was starting to grow fond of the name Stinky. Oh, I can't believe you just did that.
Did what?
You smiled. I just saw you smile.
Vulcans don't smile.
Oh, this one does. I saw you.
You're mistaken.
It was Stinky, wasn't it? You smiled when I said, Stinky. Well, good morning, Stinky. That's a lovely day, isn't it? Stinky.
T'Pol smiles, Reed smiles back. A silent moment charged. Reed takes the hand that's been touching his. T'Pol's face becomes serious as she slowly bends down to kiss him. Zeet, zeet, the sound of fritzing static breaks the mood. They react to the noise.
What's that?
Another burst of static, Wynn.
I got the receiver working, but the transmitter's a lost cause.
Cut to interior Shuttlepod One. Trip is on the floor working on the components seen earlier. The static is coming through the pod's comm system.
Who's Stinky?
We reveal that Reed has been lying on his bunk. He's just come out of his dream.
I beg your pardon?
You were talking in your sleep. Kept calling for some guy named Stinky.
Reed sits up, gathering himself. We hear more crackling static.
Did you repair the receiver? What's that? Is that a ship?
The range is very limited. It's probably just white noise. The sound of the galaxy laughing at us.
A beat as they listen to the crackling static. Then, boom, the shuttle suddenly jolts. Both men react, startled.
What the hell was that?
I don't know, but it felt a little like whatever knocked out the sensor array.
We're losing atmosphere. The pressure's down 8%.
Help me, we gotta find the hole.
Without sensors, it's not going to be easy to isolate the breach.
Then use your ears.
Pressure's down 22%.
The damn hole's too small.
God damn it, where is it?
It's nitrogen from the coolant tanks. Just give me a few seconds.
Vapor
Now,
spalls into the air.
let's find the leak.
They start moving around through the fog, searching for the leak.
I've got it. It's over here.
Reed is looking at a small section of the ceiling where the vapor is visibly being sucked out into space through a tiny opening no larger than a grain of rice.
There's another one down here.
Angle on his knees, looking at another tiny opening where the vapor is escaping. Trip puts his finger over the hole.
Put your finger on it until we figure out what to do.
Reed places his finger over his hole. The hissing sound is now stopped. Both men have their fingers over their holes, one on the ceiling, one on the floor. Not sure what to do next. A long beat, then.
We have some valve sealant in storage bin 3.
Have we got anything a little closer?
Reed glances around.
Do you mind passing me your meatloaf?
What?
Well, I assumed you finished it.
Trip looks at his food tray from earlier, which is only half finished, sitting on the floor. He reaches out one leg to knock the tray in Reed's direction, carefully, not to take his finger off the hole. It's difficult to stretch. Finally, he kicks the tray, and it slides toward Reed, who stops it with his foot. He dips down with his boot into mashed potatoes, touches a little bit of it onto his foot, lifts up his leg, and transfers a small part of the potato onto his forefinger, which he smears across the hole. Once content that the hole has been sealed, he scoops another dollop of potato and kneels down to plug the other hole, a moment of relief.
And you came close to criticizing my choice of cuisine. Obviously, whatever hit us went clear through the pod.
The vapor is beginning to dissipate. Reed checks his station.
I'm afraid it did more than puncture the cabin. On its way out, it was kind enough to rupture one of the O2 cylinders.
Great. How much closer are we to oblivion?
We've got 2 days of air left.
Off of Reed's fatalistic look, we fade out. The end of Act 2. Act 3. Fade in interior Shuttlepod One. Reed is holding a high-tech container of sealant, using a small brush to seal the hole on the ceiling. Trip is on the floor, working on his components.
Yeah, the skin of this pod is designed to deflect a meteor 5 times the size of this hole.
Well, in that case, I guess it wasn't a meteor. Wonder if something like it destroyed Enterprise.
We'll never know.
Always the optimist.
We've got 48 hours of air left. What do you expect me to do? Sit here and plan my wedding?
I'm confident there'll be a Charles Tucker IV one day.
Well, then maybe it's your wedding we should be planning. That's assuming we can find you a bride in the next day and a half.
Trip keeps working.
You know, there's a little bar in Mill Valley where all the Starfleet trainees used to go.
The 602 Club?
You know it?
I was in there more times than I care to remember.
Yeah, I met the girl of my dreams there one Friday night. Yeah, she was the one. There's no doubt about it. We had it all figured out, where we'd live, names of our kids. Ah, Ruby. Whatever happened to you?
Ruby? You mean the waitress, Ruby?
You know her?
More times than I care to remember.
Ouch.
I guess we have more in common than I thought.
Would another half day be worth freezing your butt off?
What are you talking about?
Well, if we lower the thermostat in here to about -5 centigrade, we should be able to use that power to enhance the efficiency of the atmosphere recyclers.
Our last 3 days freezing versus our last 2.5 toasty warm. What a delightful choice.
Well, I'd pick freezing. Another half day is another half day.
Oh, then freezing it is.
As Trip gets up and works the station, lowering the thermostat, Reed moves to the rear compartment, opens it, and removes an electric razor and a small magnetic mirror. He places the mirror on the bulkhead and proceeds to start shaving. Trip watches him for a beat.
And just what are you doing?
An officer, at his best, is always well groomed.
Huh. Well, nice to see you're developing a more positive attitude.
Actually, I was thinking about what our corpses will look like when they're eventually found. With no air in the pod, though, we should remain in fairly good condition.
Charming. But you're forgetting one thing, Malcolm.
Oh, yeah? What's that?
If I remember my honors biology course, your hair and fingernails keep growing for quite a while after you're dead. I'm pretty sure that includes your beard.
Reed takes this in, realizes Trip's right. He turns off the razor, flips it back into the compartment.
Thanks.
He sits down and rubs his hands together. It's starting to get cold. Cut to exterior space, Enterprise at warp. Interior ready room. Archer is at his desk. The door chimes.
Come in.
I've analyzed the scans we took of the Tesnian ship right before it crashed. I believe they were struck by a micro-singularity.
You still chasing gremlins?
This is no myth, Captain.
She hands him the pad.
3 of the singularities also hit Enterprise. They collided with our hull plating here, here, and here.
So you're telling me these are tiny black holes?
They were. The dispersal patterns on the hull suggest they dissipated on impact. This could be a significant discovery, Captain. If we could get quantum sensor readings of the 3 impact points, we could authenticate our findings.
I'd be a little less concerned with winning the Nobel Prize right now and a little more concerned with Trip and Malcolm. Their shuttlepod doesn't have the hull plating we do. They could be in for a rough ride when they get back to the asteroid field. Better hail them. Agree to a new rendezvous point.
I never intended to suggest that our crew members were less important than a scientific discovery, even one of this historic magnitude.
Time's a-wasting.
T'Pol exits. Off of Archer's concerned, we cut to exterior space, the shuttle pod at Impulse. Interior Shuttlepod One. It is freezing cold. A thin layer of frost now covers the windows and some of the consoles, and we can see that both men's breath. They both wear away jackets and ball caps. Trip is sitting on the floor, still working on the components. Reed is at the helm, continuing his letters. More beard growth on both men.
My dearest Deborah, by this time, I'm certain you've learned about the tragedy that befell the Starship Enterprise. You've also undoubtedly learned that my colleague, Charles Tucker, and I managed to survive for a brief time after the accident. It's during that brief time that I've chosen to correspond with you. Although our relationship was short-lived and at times tumultuous, I can't help but picture your beautiful smile. It gives me great comfort. Think of me from time to time. Cordially, Malcolm.
Suddenly, we hear a crackle of static come over the comm. Reed taps the control to stop the recording and turns to Tripp.
A ship?
Tripp glances at the readout.
No, it's got a little more modulation than the last one, but could be just some random gamma ray burst.
Disappointed, Reed turns back to the helm and taps the control to start a new recording.
My dearest Rochelle. By this time, I'm certain you've learned about the tragedy that befell the Starship Enterprise. You also undoubtedly learned that my colleague Charles Tucker and I managed to...
Wouldn't it be easier just to record one message and add the dear whoever afterward? This is the 5th or 6th identical letter.
That's not true. There have been subtle differences. I'd never refer to Rochelle as having a beautiful smile.
Oh.
No, with her, it was the eyes.
Tripp feels the need to change the subject to a less trivial concern.
Travis and Hoshi couldn't have been more than 24, 25 years old.
If the captain were with us, I wonder if he'd feel guilty about bringing them on this mission.
Oh, not for a minute. They'd out doing what they love.
I don't remember Hoshi loving much about being in deep space.
Ah, she was coming along. She saved our asses on more than one occasion. I plan on letting her family know just how essential she was.
Oh, sounds like you've got some letters to record too.
I'll wait to tell them in person.
Reed sighs.
Your treacly optimism is becoming to get a little tiresome.
Oh, unlike your heartfelt letters of farewell to half the girls in San Francisco?
At least I'm capable of accepting our fate. We're both going to be dead in about 33 hours, Commander. Whether our beards continue to grow or not is of no concern to me. We will be dead. And unless some ship happens to cross our path, our bearded bodies will be discovered in about 3 or 4 years. Is that optimistic enough for you?
What is your problem with having a little hope?
What is your problem with facing the truth?
Tripp's getting fed up. He stands and moves to the locker where the rations are stored.
You're a real regular Grim Reaper, you, Malcolm. Anyone ever tell you that?
Reed is silent.
Well, if this little trip is a death sentence, and it seemed to me we're entitled to a last meal.
He opens the
What'll it be?
locker.
I'm afraid our selection is somewhat limited.
I'm not hungry.
Well, then how about a drink?
He grabs a bottle of bourbon.
I don't drink on duty.
Are you serious? We're dead men, remember?
He pours 2 glasses of the liquor.
What's the matter, Lieutenant? Are you afraid the autopsy will show your blood alcohol level was too high to pilot a shuttle?
He hands him a glass.
Live a little. It's an order.
As Reed reluctantly takes the glass, Tripp pulls a small container of hydraulic fluid out of the compartment, tears a little piece of insulation fabric from the inside, the open panel. Then he drops it into a container, creating a makeshift candle. He places the candle on the floor and lights it with a small plasma torch.
Do you really think that's going to provide any heat?
Well, the bourbon will provide the heat. Candle's just for mood.
He sits down next to Reed and raises his glass.
To the brave men and women of the Starship Enterprise.
Reed cannot refuse this sentiment, so he reluctantly raises his glass and takes a sip. Tripp downs his in one gulp.
You know that's going to consume oxygen, don't you?
You're right. We'll probably be dead 5 or 6 minutes earlier than we would have been. I can live with that. Anyway, sounds to me like that as far as you're concerned, the sooner the better.
Reed is stung by these words.
Is that really how you see me? The eternal pessimist? The Grim Reaper? I don't want to die. What makes you think I want to die?
Because ever since we saw Enterprise spread across that asteroid, you've done nothing but write your own obituary.
I lost nearly everyone I cared about on that ship. Those girls I talked about, Rochelle, Deborah, Caitlin, none of them worked out because I couldn't get very close to them. Not one. Never got very close to my family either. Not that it's any business of yours. But with the crew of the Enterprise, it was different. I was really beginning to feel comfortable with them.
He sits down and he downs the rest of his bourbon.
And now the only one that's left thinks that I'm the bloody angel of death.
A quiet moment. Trip feels a little guilty. He refills Reed's glass and pours another for himself. They're both extremely cold. Trip leans forward and blows out the candle.
All of a sudden, 5 or 6 more minutes seems kind of nice.
Off of the moment, we cut to exterior space shuttlepod at Impulse. Interior Shuttlepod One, later. It's cold. The consoles are all frozen. Trip and Reed are huddled together, blankets wrapped over their away jackets. The bottle of bourbon is 2/3 empty. Both men are more than a little intoxicated. The comm system can be heard crackling behind them. More beard growth on both men.
Does that sound modulated enough for you?
Modulated?
Yeah, the radio. Or is it just the galaxy giggling at us?
Well, I can giggle all at once, but the galaxy's not getting any more of our bourbon.
A beat as they drink to that.
You know, it's funny. I was beginning to think that Captain Archer was invulnerable. That just being on the same starship as him made me safe. God, he had a knack for getting us out of trouble, didn't he?
No, he's always been that way. When I first taught him to dive, it really got on my nerves. He'd come down to the Keys at least once a month. Whatever it was I was teaching him, he'd get it the first time. Did you ever try to clear your mask?
Clear a mask?
Everybody's got to do it before they get certified. Everybody's got to do it before they get certified.
I think you just said that.
I think that's what. The instructor fills your mask up with water and you have to clear it by blowing out through your nose. Nobody likes it.
Yeah. Can't imagine why you'd have a problem with that.
No. I was the instructor. I'd been diving all my life. Then big Mr. Starfleet comes down and does everything faster and better than I could. Well, that's when I decided to introduce him to old Waldo.
Who was that?
A green moray. Said he was 30 years old. Must have been 2.5 meters long. I took the captain down to Waldo's hole. Told him there was some beautiful starfish inside. And he reached in, and I'll be damned if old Waldo didn't take a hold of his forearm.
A moray eel? Are you out of your mind?
No, I was just breaking about every rule in the book. But he was wearing titanium mesh. I figured the worst thing that could happen would be the Waldo'd scare him a little. He deserved to have the piss taken out of him.
So?
No such luck. He pulled Waldo clear out of that hole. Don't think I'd ever seen that eel's tail before. He found some pressure point under its lower jaw, right about here, and Waldo just let go. Swam back down the hole.
That must have been the last time the captain went diving with you.
Nah, see, that's the thing. He found it all funnier than I did. Took me out to dinner that night.
Okay.
Steaks, lobsters, Kentucky bourbon.
Yeah. What do you think about T'Pol? Do you think she's pretty?
Paul? You serious?
Well, she's a woman, you know. I think she's pretty.
You've had too much drink.
Don't tell me you've never looked at her that way. You know. In that way.
She's Vulcan.
The comm crackles.
I think she's pretty.
Oh, God.
You ever notice her bum?
What?
Her bum. She's got an awfully nice bum.
The comm crackles again. They ignore it. Pour another drink. Trip raises his glass.
Well, to Sub-Commander T'Pol.
Awfully nice bum.
They drink. Another burst of static. This time it catches their attention. The both turn toward the empty helm. The sound now contains unmistakable, man-made elements. They exchange a look, and Trip slowly gets to his feet, freezing cold and a little wobbly. He makes his way to the helm, scrapes the frost from the console with his hand, and starts working. The static begins to clear up, and before long we begin to hear what may be a faint, staticky sounds of a voice. Reed gets up with difficulty and joins Trip.
It's probably nothing, right?
It's definitely not nothing.
Well, that means it's something. So what is it?
Trip continues to work.
Is it something? Or someone? Because, I mean, if someone. Sorry.
They listen. A staticky voice starts to come through.
There's definitely someone.
Oh, God, we have no way to respond, do we? Oh, this is like the plane flying over the desert island in a Lost at Sea movie.
Malcolm?
Sorry. Happy endings. I must think happy endings.
Voice begins to clear up, and we can now recognize that it belongs to Hoshi.
Micro singularity? New coordinates? Please respond.
They react.
That's Hoshi. That's impossible.
Don't be so pessimistic.
Oh,
It's not impossible. It's Hoshi. They're okay. Enterprise is okay. Oh, it's Hoshi.
Reed throws his arms around Trip as the crackling message repeats itself more clearly.
Adjust your heading to new coordinates. Rendezvous in 2 days. Respond.
Rendezvous. Oh, what a beautiful word.
Trip breaks the embrace, a somber look on his face.
What's wrong?
they're still 2 days away.
And we only have little more than 1 day's air left.
No way to tell them to get here sooner.
Off of this realization, we fade out. End of Act 3. Act 4, fade in, exterior space shuttle pod as it races by at high impulse. Interior Shuttlepod One, cold, tense. Reed is at the helm working. Trip is at a nearby workstation. They've both sobered up a little.
Are you sure you got the coordinates right?
Yes. Not that it matters.
Lieutenant.
They're probably traveling at what? Warp 2, Warp 3? Compared to them, we're like a garden snail. Where we go and how fast we get there, frankly, is irrelevant.
If I purge the CO2 filters, it'll give us a little more air.
How much? An hour's worth?
Probably less.
Great. So when they reach us in 2 days, we'll have been out of air for 11 hours. You ever try holding your breath for 11 hours?
One train leaves New York at 3 a.m. heading west, while the other leaves Chicago at 4:30 heading east. I never could figure those out.
Beat.
Enterprise is going to wonder why we haven't responded, right? I mean, maybe they'll be concerned, increase their speed.
Maybe. But if we really want to get them to go to high warp, we're going to have to attract their attention, something a little more dramatic than not answering their hails.
Okay, can they see our sensors?
2 days away at Warp 3? They can see us, but maybe not too clearly. We should be a nice little blip onto Paul's viewer.
And we've got to get that blip to tell them to pick up a little steam. What if we fired our weapons?
They're nearly a quarter of a light year away. Our plasma cannons have a range of less than 10 kilometers. It would all still look like a single blip. It's going to take a lot more than that.
They think.
What if we jettison the impulse drive?
What good would that do?
You could rig a self-destruct. I imagine that would make quite an explosion. Maybe even big enough to make that blip do something odd.
I can't blow up our engine. We'd be adrift, dead in space.
What's the difference between that and traveling at a snail's pace?
I'm an engineer. I won't blow up our engine.
Then I'll ask you again. You ever hold your breath for 11 hours?
Trip considers. He takes a swig of the bourbon, then he hands the bottle to Reed. Reed is shivering now and wraps his blanket tightly around himself and settles back into his chair. Trip stands and heads to the rear of the cabin.
I think I have some micro detonators here somewhere.
He starts looking through a storage compartment. Cut to exterior space shuttle pod at impulse. We hear a series of hydraulic clanks and whirs, and then the glow of the rear engine ports start to die down. Angle on the bottom of the pod, we see a large access hatch opening, and the impulse engine disengages from the pod. It begins to slowly tumble away and disappears into the distance. Seconds later, it explodes. Interior Shuttlepod One, trembling from the explosion outside, Trip and Reed exchange a look, both men shivering and exhausted. Shaking off, the shaking subsides. Now that the engine is gone, there's an eerie silence. After a long beat.
How does it feel to be the snail?
I saw a great cartoon once. There are these two snails sitting on the back of a big old turtle. One snail turns to the other and says, "Hold on, Fred. Here we go."
Reed manages to smile. There's nothing to do but wait. Dissolve 2. Exterior space shuttle pod. The pod is adrift in space. Interior Shuttlepod 1 the next day. Trip and Reed are huddled under their blankets, immobile from the cold. Their beards have grown.
If I'm right, I get the rest of the bourbon.
Fine. Less than 12 hours left, then you win. More than 12 hours, and it's mine. Oh, go on then, check the pressure gauge.
Oh, you check it. I don't think I can move my leg.
Slowly and painfully, Reed manages to get to his feet, and he walks to the helm. He wipes some frost off the console and checks the readout.
Oh, I can't believe we've been sitting here that long.
Oh, come on, let's hear it. How much air's left?
10 hours.
Well, that's probably the last bet I'll ever make. And I won. I should feel like celebrating, shouldn't I?
Well, the whiskey's yours now. Why don't you give us a toast before you drink it?
Tripp unscrews the bottle and he pours Reed a glass, tries to think of a toast, but he can't. He looks at Reed for a long beat. A thought is forming. Then he takes a swig of the bourbon out of the bottle.
10 hours of air for 2 men. If there were only one of us, you'd have 20 hours, wouldn't he?
Great idea. Why don't you just climb up into the airlock and seal yourself in?
Tripp manages a smile.
That's just what I was thinking.
Oh, any last words you want me to pass along?
Yeah. You tell Captain Archer it's one hell of an honor serving with him.
Tripp tosses him his blanket. Reed eyes him, realizing that he's serious. Tripp works a control panel by the airlock hatch. We hear hydraulics working.
What are you doing?
Look, we don't know whether or not they saw our little display of pyrotechnics, but either way, this will double your chances.
You're crazy. Now get away from there.
Tripp opens the hatch, revealing the airlock beyond.
Sit down, Lieutenant.
If anybody's going up in there, it should be me. You're the chief engineer.
And I'm also in charge of deciding who's going into this airlock. Do I make myself clear?
A tense moment, then Tripp begins to climb up the ladder into the airlock. Reed thinks fast and moves to the compartment, pulls out a phase pistol.
What?
I just happen to have it on my person.
Uh-huh.
Commander,
Tripp
What are you
glances-
going to do, kill me?
it's set to stun. I don't want to use it, but I will.
Put it down.
Go to hell!
Stop trying to be a hero. It doesn't suit you.
What do you know about being a hero? It only takes a coward to crawl up inside of space and die.
Then go ahead and shoot me. But you better hope you'd make it. You better hope we don't make it, because if we survive, the first thing I'm going to do is bust your ass back to crewman second class for insubordination.
Oh, be my guest. I could use a little less responsibility. Now get down!
Who the hell do you think you are?
Your armory officer, and perhaps your friend.
Friends don't shoot each other.
Do you know, I'm not a doctor, but I'm pretty sure that when you use up a lot more oxygen when you shout like that.
So what are you saying? That you'd rather have Enterprise find the 2 of us dead in here?
That's exactly what I'm saying. There's 1 chance in 1,000 that they saw our impulse drive explode, that they increased their speed. I'll take that chance. I've invested far too much time trying to figure you out, Mr. Tucker. I'm not about to accept that it was all for nothing.
He lowers his pistol and places it on the console. With his last bit of strength, he sits back down on the floor. After a moment, Tripp finally climbs down and sits on the floor next to him. He grabs his blanket back and wraps it around himself. Silence as the 2 men sit side by side, shivering. We fade to black. Fade in, interior sickbay. Close on Reed, as he opens his eyes, reveal that they're lying in a biobed, Archer, Phlox, and T'Pol looking down at him. Tripp lies unconscious in the next biobed. They're both covered with special thermal blankets, beard growth on both men.
We're back. How?
Easy, Malcolm. You fellas had a little bout with hypothermia.
The commander.
Archer indicates
He's
the bed next to
doing
Reed.
fine.
Reed looks at T'Pol with an odd sense of deja vu. Was she about to come on to him, or was this just another dream? He's too disorientated to know.
It took nearly 3 hours to get your body temperatures back to normal.
You must have seen the explosion.
Hard to miss. You know, you guys only had 2 or 3 hours of air left.
You don't say. We saw debris on one of the asteroids. We assumed it was Enterprise. We I thought you were all...
I'll tell you all about it in the morning. Right now, the doctor needs to warm you up a few more degrees.
Archer, Phlox, and T'Pol head for the door.
Sub Commander?
As the other two exit, T'Pol returns to his bedside.
Yes.
Isn't there something you were supposed to say to me?
About what?
Heroics. Something about heroics?
Good night, Lieutenant.
She heads for the door. Reed is beginning to realize that his dream will remain just that. After a beat, he looks over at a sleeping Trip.
Trip? You mind if I call you Trip?
There's no answer. Reed lies back on his bed. He takes a breath, relieved to be home. As the camera pulls back on the two men lying side by side in the dim light.
Sweet dreams.
Fade out. End of Act 4, the end.
Like, subscribe, and join us on Patreon.